Pregnant ex-wife surprises famous lawyer in court with a revelation that broke the hearts of everyone around. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The echo of polished shoes on marble floors announced his arrival. Gabriel Owens, a renowned attorney famed for his winning streak in high-profile litigation, moved through the courthouse lobby with the precision of a veteran general. His expression was unflinching, his gaze focused, and every button on his tailored suit was fastened with meticulous care. On any other morning, he might have paused to check his phone for messages from influential clients or to shoot a cold glance at his rivals. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that even Gabriel, normally consumed by his own ambitions, could sense. Outside, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, speculating about the case that would be heard in Judge Fairchild's courtroom, another sensational trial with Owens at the center. Usually, he would revel in their attention, but something pulled at him from deep inside, a nagging pressure he couldn't quite name. As he passed through security, his mind raced with fragments of the past he'd long tried to bury. In the hallway leading to courtroom B, his junior associate Marianne hurried to keep up with his brisk steps. "Sir," she whispered, scanning her notes as they walked, "the plaintiff's testimony might be more damaging than we anticipated. Are we prepared?" "Marianne," Gabriel replied in a near monotone, "I'm always prepared." Yet the moment he said it, a strange chill ran down his spine. He brushed off the feeling as stress from the day's proceedings. After all, it wasn't the first time he'd faced a tough opponent. But this particular day, unknown to him, would carry a twist he never saw coming. A personal blow more powerful than anything he could have imagined. Inside the courtroom, the typical hum of legal formalities gave way to sharp bursts of chatter. Gabriel didn't notice at first that the murmurs were louder than usual. Then he heard his name whispered in corners, followed by a phrase that froze him in place. "She's back, and she's pregnant." Instantly, his memory catapulted him back 6 years. A stormy night, a rushed wedding in a small chapel, and an argument so fierce it shattered every illusion of happiness he once believed in. That memory was connected to a single person, Ava Green, his ex-wife, the woman who knew him better than anyone, and the woman he'd worked hard to erase from his life. "Your Honor, all parties are present," the clerk's voice rang, snapping Gabriel out of his thoughts. He glanced around, expecting to see a routine civil dispute, but instead, his eyes fell upon someone who made every muscle in his body turn rigid. Ava. She stood at the plaintiff's table, head held high, one hand instinctively resting on her midsection. The visible curve beneath her blouse confirmed what he'd just overheard. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Gabriel, and for an instant he forgot where he was. The shock that gripped him was so intense he barely registered Marianne tugging at his sleeve, urging him to keep his composure. She looked different, stronger, more resolute. Gone was the timid young bride overshadowed by his ambition. But there was something else, an unmistakable sadness in her eyes, like she'd carried too many burdens alone. Gabriel had never anticipated seeing her again, especially not like this, in his own professional arena, a place where he always felt invincible. Judge Fairchild, renowned for her no-nonsense demeanor, peered over her glasses. "Counselor Owens, are you prepared to continue?" Gabriel cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor." He made his way to the defense table, every step heavier than the last, painfully aware of the stares bouncing between him and Ava. It wasn't just a private matter anymore. The entire courtroom was picking up on the tension. Journalists in the back scribbled furiously in their notepads. Something big was happening, and they all wanted front-row seats to the unraveling drama. At that moment, Gabriel avoided meeting Ava's gaze, but he could feel her presence like a magnet. He had so many questions. Why was she here? Why was she pregnant? And the most chilling, was the child? He forced his mind back to the case at hand, except the case was Ava herself. By some twisted turn of fate, She was opposing him today, and the official file in front of him read, Green v. Spencer Corporation. He was the corporation's hired legal gun, but the real target was evidently personal. Your Honor, Ava began, and her voice caused Gabriel's breath to hitch. She sounded determined, each syllable punctuated with a quiet passion. I'm prepared to argue that the Spencer Corporation's negligence caused irreversible harm to my family, and that I have grounds for injunctive relief to protect others from the same fate. A hush settled in the courtroom. Even Judge Fairchild leaned forward, intrigued. Gabriel noticed how Ava's left hand, devoid of any ring, trembled slightly. She was nervous. He could see the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, but behind it lay a raw, steely resolve. Gabriel stood, adjusting his tie. My client categorically denies any liability. While Ms. Green's circumstances are unfortunate, blaming the Spencer Corporation lacks factual basis. This lawsuit— He hesitated, searching for the right word. It's misguided. He nearly choked on that last word. For the first time, his usual confidence faltered. Ava stepped closer. Misguided? She gave a short, humorless laugh. You and I both know there's more to this story than corporate policy, don't we, Gabriel? Her direct address jolted him. Every eye in the courtroom shifted to see his reaction. The expression on Judge Fairchild's face was unreadable, but she sensed the personal undercurrent. I'd advise counsel to remain professional, the judge interjected. Keep personal references to a minimum. Ava nodded politely, but her eyes stayed locked on Gabriel's, refusing to let him escape. My apologies, Your Honor. For a moment, neither side spoke. A tension-laden silence weighed on everyone present, as if each person was bracing for the next reveal. Across the aisle, Gabriel's opposing counsel, a junior attorney working under Ava's supervision, slid documents across the plaintiff's table. Ava nodded, then turned her attention to the clerk. I'd like to enter these exhibits, she announced. They pertain to the Spencer Corporation's safety record, a series of internal memos disregarding standard protocols, and additional personal correspondence that led to my separation from Mr. Owens. Gabriel stiffened. Objection, he blurted. Relevance, Your Honor. These documents have no direct bearing on the negligence claim. Ava's attorney rose, but she gently motioned him to sit. Her calm was startling. Your Honor, these letters demonstrate a pattern of intimidation and strategic cover-ups orchestrated by the very same corporate counsel who once advised Spencer Corporation to cut corners, and that counsel was none other than Mr. Owens. This establishes motive and knowledge. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The reporters in the gallery scribbled fiercely, capturing every detail. Judge Fairchild frowned, reviewing the exhibits. Mr. Owens, she said, her voice firm, I'll allow the documents in for now, but I remind both parties, this is a civil negligence lawsuit, not a personal dispute. Do I make myself clear? Gabriel swallowed hard. Perfectly, Your Honor. In his peripheral vision, he noticed Ava placing a hand on her stomach again, the stark reminder of her pregnancy and the possibility that he had something to do with it threatened to shatter his concentration. He'd built his career on composure, but behind that stoic mask, a storm raged. Court will recess for 1 hour, Judge Fairchild declared, banging her gavel. We'll reconvene at noon. As soon as the judge stepped off the bench, the chatter in the courtroom surged. Gabriel's phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues, maybe the press, possibly old friends reading rumors on social media. He ignored it. Ava began gathering her papers. She looked up and caught Gabriel's eye. For a fleeting second, the tension gave way to something else. Regret, maybe. Sadness. And beneath it all, a fierce undercurrent of unresolved feelings. Marianne hovered by Gabriel's side. Sir, are you all right? He drew a breath. I need some air. He hurried into the hallway, but Ava was already there, standing by a tall window that overlooked the courthouse fountain. Rain threatened to fall from the overcast sky, casting the day in shadows. She turned when she heard his footsteps. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the swirling silence louder than any words. Finally, Ava broke it. "Gabriel," she said, her voice softer than it had been before. "I didn't want it to be this way. Not in front of everyone." "Then why are you here?" he asked, barely above a whisper. He noticed the tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, a heartbreaking contrast to the strength she'd shown in court. "Because your corporate ambitions destroyed lives, including mine, and now I have no choice but to fight." "What about—" He glanced at her belly, not finishing the question. "The baby?" she said, reading his expression. "I'm still not sure how this will change anything, but it changes everything for me, Gabriel. Everything." He felt an unfamiliar sting of guilt. The sensation grew stronger with each passing second in her presence. Part of him wanted to reach out, to place a hand on her stomach and feel the life that might be his. Another part wanted to lash out, to deny, to argue, to protect his pride. Ava inhaled shakily, as though summoning the courage to say more. "There are things I discovered while working on this case. Things about Spencer Corporation, about you, and about the promises you made to certain people who are no longer alive to defend themselves. These documents are just the tip of the iceberg." Gabriel's mouth went dry. "I've followed the rules," he said, but even to his own ears, the statement sounded hollow. "Your rules," Ava retorted. She turned away, shoulders trembling, a wave of emotion coursing through her. Before either could speak again, the bailiff's voice rang out, announcing that court would resume shortly. She wiped her eyes, steeled herself, and gave him one final look. "We can't run from this anymore," she said, then walked off toward the ladies' room, leaving Gabriel standing by the window, heart pounding with unresolved questions and a dread-laced curiosity about what she truly knew. He stared after her, the swirl of regret, confusion, and fear almost paralyzing. The unstoppable force of justice that he used to manipulate for his clients now seemed aimed straight at his own conscience, and the most terrifying thought of all was that perhaps, just perhaps, he deserved it. 30 minutes later, Courtroom B was back in session. A hush fell over the observers as Judge Fairchild took her seat, her usual composed stare flicking between the two parties. Though she made no mention of the tension from before, it radiated through the room like a static charge. Gabriel sat rigid at the defense table, pretending to be engrossed in his paperwork, but his eyes involuntarily shifted toward Ava, who was conferring with her associate at the plaintiff's table. Ava seemed equally tense, her gaze lingering on Gabriel for a fraction of a second before returning to her notes. The memory of their brief conversation in the hallway still throbbed in her mind. She hadn't expected him to look so haunted. Once upon a time, she thought him incapable of regret. Marianne passed Gabriel a stack of documents. She cleared her throat softly, nudging him from his reverie. "We should address the new exhibits, sir. The ones Ms. Green brought in earlier." He gave a curt nod. His voice came out quieter than usual. "We'll move to strike them as inadmissible, or at least limit their scope." Marianne pursed her lips. "Sir, I'm not certain that strategy will hold. The judge seemed open to letting them in." "Then we argue the prejudicial impact," Gabriel snapped, failing to hide his frustration. Marianne pressed her lips together, making a quick note on her pad. "All rise," the bailiff called. Everyone stood, and Judge Fairchild motioned for them to be seated. The hum of tension sharpened. Cameras flashed at the back of the room, capturing Ava's resolute posture, Gabriel's carefully crafted stoicism, and the swirl of legal personnel who seemed equally curious about the personal drama unfolding in front of them. "Counsel," the judge began, adjusting her glasses. "Before we proceed, I want clarity regarding these additional exhibits. Ms. Green, you mentioned corporate memos and personal letters relevant to the Spencer Corporation's alleged negligence. Please outline your basis for relevance again." Ava stood. Her voice was steady but threaded with emotional undertones only someone who knew her well would detect. Your Honor, these documents show a consistent disregard for safety protocols. More critically, they prove the corporation had prior knowledge of hazardous conditions, which directly contributed to my family's, to the harm we've suffered. The personal letters, although not typical corporate records, include communications from Mr. Owens advising Spencer executives to expedite strategies that skirted regulations. That advice, in my view, is central to establishing the chain of liability. A quiet wave of whispers rolled across the courtroom. Ava had effectively placed Gabriel at the center of the blame, suggesting his own counsel had paved the way for catastrophic consequences. From the defense table, Gabriel took a slow breath. This was the moment he usually thrived on, discrediting the opposition's evidence with crisp logic. But this time, the logic was blurred by guilt. He could recall drafting certain memos that skirted the edges of ethics, though he was always careful to stay within legal boundaries. Now, hearing Ava describe them as part of a grander conspiracy made his stomach knot. He rose, buttoning his suit jacket with his usual precision. Your Honor, the defense maintains that these letters are irrelevant and highly prejudicial. They reference personal disputes that have no bearing on the specific claims of negligence. Ms. Green's attempt to link private correspondence between me and certain corporate stakeholders to her alleged injury is speculative at best. Ava's attorney, a soft-spoken man named Mitchell Dwyer, stood. He had pale, wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor that contrasted with Gabriel's intensity. Your Honor, if it were only personal, we wouldn't introduce them. But these letters specifically advise Spencer Corporation on ways to circumvent more expensive safety upgrades that could have prevented lives from being endangered, including Ms. Green's late mother. At that, Ava's expression darkened. Gabriel glanced her way. Late mother? She had never told him her mother passed due to anything connected with Spencer. Then again, he realized bitterly, they hadn't exactly been on speaking terms for years. Could he have missed something so crucial about her life? The thought sent a fresh wave of guilt surging through him. Judge Fairchild tapped a pen on the bench. Very well, I will allow the exhibits for now, pending a final ruling on admissibility once I review them in detail. Proceed with questioning, Mr. Dwyer. Mitchell thanked her and turned toward the witness stand. We call Ms. Ava Green to testify. The bailiff ushered Ava forward. Gabriel watched her settle into the witness seat, her hand placed gently on the curve of her abdomen, as if shielding the baby from the tension in the room. His breath caught, remembering the last time they were in a courtroom together. It was for their divorce decree. Back then, she'd appeared broken, leaning on her legal aid lawyer, tears in her eyes as the judge finalized the end of a short, chaotic marriage. Now she looked different, perhaps still wounded but not broken, resilient. She raised her right hand and was sworn in. Mitchell stepped closer. Ms. Green, can you please describe the circumstances under which you discovered these memos and letters? Ava folded her hands in her lap, her voice resonating clearly in the hushed courtroom. I was originally tasked with researching Spencer Corporation's compliance for a community safety group. During that process, I interviewed a former employee who provided partial internal documents. After verifying the content, I realized I needed more. I reached out. Her voice trembled slightly, to certain people who had once worked closely with the company's legal team. That's how I obtained the letters from Mr. Owens. Gabriel's throat tightened. Of course, she'd known how to get them. Through ex-associates or older administrative staff he might have forgotten. Mitchell nodded. When you say it became personal, could you clarify? Ava swallowed, clearly reluctant but resolute. I recognized references to a legal strategy meeting that Gabriel, my ex-husband, had once mentioned during our marriage. At the time, I was naive. I didn't think lawyers truly advised companies to ignore or obscure potential hazards. Her gaze flicked to Gabriel, but she quickly looked away as if it caused her too much pain to hold that eye contact for long. After my mother's accident, she died from a respiratory issue linked to toxic exposure at Spencer's facility. I pieced together that the safety lapses were deliberate cost-cutting measures. Measures recommended or, at least, condoned by Mr. Owens. Sporadic gasps dotted the gallery. This was more serious than a routine negligence claim. Ava was practically accusing Gabriel of moral complicity in her mother's death. Gabriel felt something twist inside him. He'd never wanted anyone to get hurt. He'd simply done his job, helping a major corporation minimize financial loss. But had he unwittingly contributed to real lives being destroyed? Mitchell pulled up a large display projecting snippets of a typed memo. Gabriel's signature was visible at the bottom. "Ms. Green," Mitchell continued, "could you read aloud the highlighted passage?" Ava leaned forward, scanning the text on the screen. It says, "While complete safety compliance is commendable, the financial burden of immediate upgrades may be untenable. Consider allocating resources toward regulatory lobbying rather than costly facility renovations." She trailed off, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. It ends with, "Legal ramifications can be mitigated through well-established channels." And then it's signed by Gabriel Owens. A hushed tension clung to every person present. Gabriel's jaw clenched. He remembered drafting that memo in a flurry, hammered out at midnight to keep a relentless client satisfied. He'd reasoned it was standard legal strategy: push for lobbying, shape regulations to the corporation's advantage, delay costly changes as long as possible. It was the type of approach that garnered him accolades from big clients and catapulted his career. Until now. Mitchell turned to Ava again. "In your opinion, how does this memo relate to the alleged negligence that caused your mother's death?" "It paved the way," Ava answered plainly, though her voice wavered with grief. "Spencer Corporation delayed safety upgrades for years. Those toxins continued to circulate in the building, endangering hundreds, including my mother, who worked there as a contract cleaning staff. If they'd made the improvements promptly, she might still be alive today." A restless stir took over the crowd. Gabriel fought the urge to respond, his instincts telling him to shout that she was oversimplifying legal disclaimers. But he also knew everything she said felt painfully real. He had learned, in law school and in practice, how to handle emotionally charged testimonies by dissecting them with logic and procedure. Yet here he was, entangled with personal feelings, forced to confront that maybe his advice was never as harmless as he convinced himself. Judge Fairchild's expression remained neutral, but her posture was taut. "Mr. Owens, do you wish to cross-examine at this stage?" He rose slowly. This was the moment where he normally dismantled a witness's statement piece by piece, attacking inconsistencies. But how could he attack Ava's anguish without tearing open old wounds, or forging new ones? He gripped the edge of the table, searching for composure. "Yes, Your Honor." He walked toward the witness stand, each footstep a silent war drum in his ears. Reaching the stand, he cleared his throat and forced his voice to remain even. "Ms. Green," he began, his gaze flickering to her belly again. "You've referred to this memo as if it was a final directive. But surely you realize corporate decisions are made collectively. My role was advisory, not executive. Wouldn't you agree that Spencer's board ultimately decides on safety compliance?" Ava's eyes narrowed. "Yes, the board decides, but your expertise shaped their actions. You gave them an excuse to stall safety measures. That's the point, Gabriel." He felt that single word, his name, said with raw betrayal, like a physical blow. The tension in his jaw tightened. "And your mother's medical history? Was there conclusive proof her condition was entirely caused by exposure at Spencer?" Her lips parted, and for a moment she seemed taken aback by the harshness of the question. "A thorough investigation is ongoing. But you know as well as I do that toxins in the environment can exacerbate and trigger fatal complications. I have the autopsy report that strongly suggests it." She reached for a folder, pulling out a sealed document. Mitchell swiftly handed it to the clerk, who then offered it to the judge. Judge Fairchild glanced over it briefly. "I'll review this in chambers before ruling on its admissibility." Gabriel tried to maintain his professional veneer, but inwardly he felt as though the ground were shifting beneath him. If that report conclusively linked Spencer's facility to her mother's death, and it tied back to his recommended delay tactics, his entire career, and more importantly, his conscience, would be in jeopardy. He swallowed, struggling to keep his composure. "No further questions for now," he managed. He spun on his heel, returning to his seat, feeling Ava's eyes on him. Meanwhile, the reporters at the back frantically typed and texted updates to their outlets, sensing a sensational scandal with personal betrayal at its core. As proceedings paused for procedural formalities, Gabriel found himself fighting off a wave of nausea. He glanced at Ava. Her pale face was set in determination and sorrow. And in the hollow pit of his stomach, he recognized the slow dawning of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: remorse. He closed his eyes, exhaling through clenched teeth, caught in a battle between legal strategy and the moral lines he might have crossed long ago. And overshadowing it all was the child Ava carried, a fragile new life entangled in a web of secrets he'd thought he could keep buried. A ripple of murmurs followed Ava as she left the witness stand. Even after her testimony ended, the atmosphere in the courtroom felt supercharged, every spectator wondering what else might surface. Gabriel remained rigid, his fingers clenched around a pen that threatened to snap under the pressure. The recess bell rang soon after, granting a brief pause to the intensity. "Court stands in recess for 15 minutes, declared Judge Fairchild, tapping her gavel in a decisive staccato. The bailiff's voice signaled that everyone should stand, but a thick tension clung to the air even as the judge and jury filed out. Gabriel exhaled, placed the pen on the table, and gathered his notes with deliberate slowness. Around him, journalists chatted in hushed tones, and courthouse spectators whispered about the scandal unfolding between the famous attorney and his pregnant ex-wife. Marianne leaned in. "Sir, we should probably use this break to regroup." He nodded mechanically. "Yes, the less we linger here, the better." They slipped through the crowd into an empty side room often used for private attorney conferences. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, reflecting off a narrow metal table. Gabriel set down his paperwork, but before he could say anything, Marianne pressed a water bottle into his hand. "You look pale," she noted, concern etched on her face. He took a small sip, then cleared his throat. "I'm fine." But they both knew it was a lie. Normally, Gabriel thrived under pressure. He was known to be unflappable, even arrogant when cornered. This, however, was different, far more personal. Marianne tapped the stack of exhibits Ava had introduced. "Look, we need to address those letters. If the judge allows them in completely, it's going to be tough to argue ignorance on the corporation's part. The jury will see that you encouraged cost-saving measures over safety." Gabriel nodded, recalling each line he'd once written with no thought to real-world consequences. "Yes, we can still try to argue that the final decisions fell to the board, but Ava's playing a strong emotional card by tying it to her mother's death. And," Marianne added gently, "there's the pregnancy aspect. Everyone's paying attention to that too. It's fueling public sympathy for her." Gabriel grimaced. "It's not only that. He hesitated, words freezing on his tongue. Trust was a rare commodity in his life, but Marianne had been steadfast by his side, especially during grueling late-night trial preparations. Maybe she deserved some honesty. "I didn't expect her to be pregnant, let alone show up in my courtroom. And the timing, it's possible I'm the father." Marianne's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Sir, that changes a lot." "I know," he said, voice weighed down with an unfamiliar mix of fear and hope. "But let's keep personal speculation out of our strategy. Focus on the legal issues, yes?" She nodded, although the worry in her gaze was clear. "Understood." He tried to settle himself, flipping through the evidence. Let's think about a potential settlement. The board of Spencer might prefer that to the risk of a public scandal. Marianne frowned. Settlement? That's an admission of guilt in the public eye. Are you sure it's wise? Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he rarely allowed himself in front of colleagues. Usually I'd say no, but this time if it prevents an extensive trial and further personal embarrassment, it might be worth exploring. For now, we need to keep that possibility quiet. Let's see how the rest of the day goes. Outside in the hallway, Ava stood near a window flipping through her own documents. Mitchell Dwyer, her associate, spoke in hushed tones, occasionally gesturing at the file. When she spotted Gabriel and Marianne exit the side room, Ava's lips pressed together. Part of her wanted to avoid him, while another part acknowledged they shared an irrevocable bond, past and present, and potentially future. She felt a gentle nudge on her arm. Mitchell offered a sympathetic look. "You sure you're all right?" She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine. It's just intense being back here with him." Mitchell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "He's going to push every legal angle he can, but the emotional weight of your testimony is compelling. Once the jury sees the autopsy details, it could tip the case in our favor." Ava let out a shaky breath. "I'm not doing this for leverage. I just need the truth recognized. They took shortcuts, and people died." Her gaze fell to her abdomen. The child she carried felt like a reminder of both heartbreak and possibility, an echo of the love she once believed in and the new beginning she silently hoped for. The ring of the bailiff's voice announcing the end of recess jolted her from her thoughts. "Court resumes now," the bailiff called, prompting everyone to shuffle back into courtroom B. When they reassembled, Judge Fairchild wasted no time. "Counsel will continue with the plaintiff's evidence. Mr. Dwyer, please call your next witness." Mitchell stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Serena Patterson." A middle-aged woman with a calm, authoritative bearing approached the stand. Her charcoal gray suit and the stethoscope peeking out of her bag made her look more like she'd just stepped out of a hospital than a courtroom. She was sworn in and settled confidently. "Dr. Patterson," Mitchell began, "could you state your profession for the record?" "I'm a pulmonologist specializing in occupational lung diseases," she said. Her voice was clear, carrying a note of compassion that doctors often develop after witnessing patient suffering. "Did you examine Ms. Green's mother at any point?" "Doctor." Patterson clasped her hands. "Yes, I oversaw her respiratory treatments in the last few weeks of her life." Ava inhaled sharply, memories swirling of bedside vigils, machines beeping, her mother gasping for air in a sterile hospital ward. Mitchell nodded. "And in your professional opinion, did her condition link to environmental factors at Spencer Corporation?" Gabriel tensed, ready to object if Dr. Patterson overstepped. But the doctor spoke with calm precision. "Yes, she displayed advanced symptoms consistent with exposure to toxic particulates commonly found in industrial sites that lack proper ventilation or filtration systems. She had no prior history of severe respiratory disease, so it's likely that prolonged workplace exposure significantly contributed to her fatal decline." Gabriel rose, a sense of inevitability washing over him. "Objection, Your Honor. Opinion calls for speculation. There's no absolute proof her decline was solely tied to the Spencer facility." Judge Fairchild glanced at Dr. Patterson. "Overruled for now. Dr. Patterson may continue. However, I remind the witness to stay within the scope of her expertise." The doctor nodded. "Of course. I'm not claiming it was the only factor, simply that it was a major one. Her prior medical records show no underlying conditions that would have escalated so aggressively." Mitchell held up a chart. "This is part of the autopsy report that Ms. Green recently introduced. Could you interpret the highlighted section for the court?" Dr. Patterson flipped through the pages. "It states that the patient's lung tissues showed significant scarring and chemical residues indicative of exposure to specific industrial byproducts. These are regulated substances. If a facility bypasses safety measures, workers or visitors can inhale dangerous levels of toxins over time. At the defense table, Gabriel felt a slight tremor in his hands. The quiet horror of what she described was too real. He'd never physically harmed anyone, but had his well-crafted memos helped create an environment where corners were cut, leading to tragedies like this? "Thank you, Dr. Patterson," Mitchell said, turning to the judge. "No further questions." Judge Fairchild cast a measured look at Gabriel. "Mr. Owens, your witness." He stood slowly. "Doctor, you said Ms. Green's mother had no prior underlying conditions. However, her age and potential daily habits, wouldn't those be relevant? For example, did she smoke?" Dr. Patterson shook her head. "She was not a smoker. I found no evidence of any such contributing lifestyle factors." Gabriel rifled through his notes, searching for a line of defense. "But you admit you can't pinpoint exactly how many months or years of exposure caused her decline, correct?" The doctor exhaled softly. "That's true. There is no precise timeline. Occupational diseases progress differently for each individual. But her case and the tissue analysis are strongly consistent with prolonged toxic inhalation at the site where she worked." Gabriel tried to maintain an even tone. "So it remains possible that some other factor contributed to her condition. Right, Doctor?" "Theoretically, yes," Dr. Patterson allowed. "But in my medical opinion, the Spencer facility exposure was the most significant factor." It was a losing exchange for Gabriel. Pressing too hard risked looking callous in front of the jury. He signaled an end to his questions, returning to his seat, frustration buzzing in his mind. As Dr. Patterson stepped down, the gallery buzzed with hushed chatter. The gravity of the testimony was clear. Ava's mother wasn't just a statistic. She was a person whose death might have been prevented had corporate greed not taken precedence over safety. Gabriel caught Ava's eye across the aisle. She looked exhausted, but an unwavering resolve still shone in her gaze. He glanced at her stomach again. The swirl of guilt and concern nearly consumed him, overshadowing the crisp logic he usually prized. "Mr. Dwyer, do you have more witnesses?" asked Judge Fairchild. "Just one more, Your Honor," Mitchell replied. "Then we'll rest our case." The final witness was a former Spencer employee, a technician who had been on staff for a decade. He testified to seeing advanced safety protocols proposed, only to be shelved after upper management claimed it was too expensive. The man hesitated, visibly anxious, before naming Gabriel Owens as a lawyer who advised caution against spending heavily on facility overhauls. The words cut through Gabriel like a dull blade. A hush fell. The technician's testimony confirmed what was implied in the memos, that corporate decisions were swayed heavily by legal counsel recommending cost avoidance. Though the chain of command was complex, the suggestion that Gabriel had a direct hand installing important updates felt like a nail in the coffin. When the witness finished, Mitchell announced, "Your Honor, the plaintiff rests." Judge Fairchild turned her measured gaze to the defense. "Mr. Owens, you may begin presenting your case tomorrow morning." "Yes, Your Honor," Gabriel replied, forcing a polite smile. But inwardly, he felt the storm intensify. As the gavel banged to mark the day's end, he rose in a daze. This was the moment he usually relished, when he'd plan his cross-examinations, gather expert testimonies, and pivot the narrative in his client's favor. But every piece of evidence left a bitter taste of complicity. Ava began packing her files. She was methodical, moving slowly, perhaps to stave off fatigue. He took a step toward her, uncertain. The entire courthouse seemed to freeze, reporters' eyes darting to see if sparks would fly. He cleared his throat softly. "Ava, She gave him a guarded glance, hugging a slim folder to her chest. "Yes?" His voice was a near whisper. "We should talk. Not in front of everyone, but somewhere private. Tonight." A flicker of raw emotion crossed her face. Part of her wanted to reject him outright. But there was a history there. Love, betrayal, and now another life growing inside her. She swallowed. "All right, I'll be in the courtyard near the fountain after 6. But this isn't about reconciling, Gabriel. It's about the truth." He nodded, shame pressing down on him like a weighted cloak. Understood. They parted without another word, each swallowed by their respective cluster of supporters. Yet for both, an undeniable pull remained, guiding them to a conversation that could either reignite old wounds or perhaps spark a path toward healing. Outside the courtroom, the sun dipped lower on the horizon, and though it was only late afternoon, the sky carried the dim hush of an impending storm, mirroring the tempest that raged in their lives. By the time the courthouse emptied for the day, a tense dusk had settled over the city. Thin clouds veiled the waning sun, painting the horizon with streaks of lavender and gold. In the adjacent courtyard, a sprawling stone fountain gurgled softly, its cascades tinted bronze in the fading light. It was a serene corner, oddly contrasting with the turmoil swirling in Gabriel's mind. He arrived first, nerves tight as a coiled spring. Off to one side, a few reporters still lingered near the courthouse steps, hoping for sound bites from any straggling officials or high-profile lawyers. Gabriel purposely avoided the direct path, circling around the building to enter the courtyard from a side entrance. His footsteps echoed against the paving stones, each step burdened by 1,000 thoughts. He spotted Ava beneath an old oak tree not far from the fountain. She wore a charcoal blazer over a simple blouse, a subtle reminder of the professional battlefield they'd occupied that day, but there was also a gentle glow about her, an unmistakable hush of maternal warmth that tugged at him, an unspoken possibility that the baby she carried was his. She stood quietly, gazing at the water, arms folded over the slight curve of her abdomen, lost in thought. When Gabriel approached, she turned, her eyes reflecting a complicated mix of anger, heartbreak, and something else. Maybe faint hope, though he couldn't be certain. For a moment, neither spoke. The hush of the courtyard, punctuated only by the fountain's soft splashing, cocooned them in a private world that felt far removed from the chaos of the courtroom. "Thank you for coming," Gabriel began, attempting a measured tone. His voice wavered despite his effort to sound calm. Ava nodded. "It's not like either of us can ignore this situation." She glanced toward the fountain, as if gathering courage. "You said we needed to talk, so talk." He exhaled, mind swirling with half-formed apologies and pent-up confessions. "I owe you an explanation, and God, maybe a dozen apologies, but I don't know where to start." Ava's expression flickered with hurt. "You could start by telling me why you ever gave Spencer Corporation those memos, why you chose profit over the safety of people like my mother." Her directness was like a punch to his gut. He'd prepared himself for tough questions, yet hearing it from her in such a raw and personal way made the sting worse. "When I wrote those memos, I believed I was just doing my job, helping a corporation navigate legal gray areas. It's how I was trained. My entire career was built on that approach, but I never imagined it would have such real consequences." Ava's jaw tightened. "Never imagined? Is that the defense you intend to use? That you had your eyes closed to reality?" His words caught in his throat. She was right. He'd turned a blind eye for the sake of ambition and a tidy paycheck. "I'm not defending it," he whispered. "I'm admitting it was a grave error. I can't undo the harm, no matter how much I want to. And if that's not enough, then you should know. Every day since we separated, I've wrestled with regrets." Ava closed her eyes briefly, as though steadying herself. "Regret about me? Or about your career? Because it seems you kept climbing the ladder after our divorce. Not once did you reach out to see if I was okay." He couldn't blame her for the bitterness. "Ava, I didn't contact you because I thought you'd moved on, and I was too ashamed of who I'd become. By the time I recognized the damage, it felt too late to fix anything." Her eyes glistened, though she tried to blink away the tears. "You have no idea how alone I felt. Mom got sick, and I had no clue it was tied to a corporation you were advising. Then she died, and I found the evidence. Imagine discovering that your ex-husband and the father of your unborn child played a role in the negligence that may have killed your mother." Gabriel's heart hammered. She'd said it explicitly, the father of your unborn child. He felt a flash of warmth and anxiety course through him simultaneously. "So it's mine?" he asked quietly, hardly daring to hope. Ava hesitated, as though weighing her words. "Yes," she said at last, voice soft. "I took a test as soon as I realized. There's no doubt. You're the father." He swallowed hard, grappling with the reality. A child, a life he'd helped create. The shock and guilt collided with a flicker of fatherly protectiveness he'd never expected to feel. I don't know what to say," he managed, voice thick. Ava inhaled shakily. "Neither do I. This baby deserves better than the legacy we've created, and my mother deserved better than the fate she got." He dared to move closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "For what it's worth," he said gently, "I never wanted anyone to die because of corporate cost-cutting. I was arrogant, too focused on winning, and I lost sight of the real cost." She gave him a long, searching look. The walls of anger around her eyes shifted slightly, revealing a fraction of the tenderness he remembered from when they first fell in love. "I don't know if that can ever bring my mother back," she murmured. "But if you're sincere in your regret, maybe there's a sliver of hope that you'll fight for the right thing this time, that you'll do more than just protect your client." The words hung in the air. Gabriel felt their weight. "I can't simply abandon my professional ethics. The board hired me—" She cut him off, her voice flaring. "Ethics? Do you call it ethics to bury evidence and spin tragedies into lawsuits you can shrug off? Because that's what you did." A bitter ache spread in his chest. She wasn't wrong. He'd spent years perfecting the art of turning liabilities into dismissals, victim stories into mere footnotes in corporate settlements. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I'd like a chance to make amends. If there's any way to help you, help this case, maybe I can tip the balance toward justice." Ava studied him, skepticism evident. "And you think the Spencer board would let you compromise them from the inside? They're paying you to bury the evidence, not bring it to the light." He nodded grimly. "I know. But I also know where the skeletons are hidden. Some figurative, some literal. I've seen their private documents. If they try to scapegoat me or push me too far, I might be able to use that knowledge to negotiate a fair settlement or force a genuine admission of fault." She arched an eyebrow. "You want me to trust that you'll sabotage your own client for me?" He swallowed. "Not sabotage. I'm not aiming for unethical revenge. But if pushing them to accept responsibility is the only moral route, I'll do it. If nothing else, I owe it to you. And to—" His gaze flicked to her belly, a wave of conflicting emotions flooding him. "To our child." The sharp edges of her expression softened just a hair. "If you're serious, you should know how high the stakes are. The people in that boardroom won't hesitate to protect themselves, even if it means tossing you under the bus. Or worse." A flicker of fear crossed Gabriel's features. He was well aware of Spencer's influence and how many powerful allies they had in the legal and political realm. One word to the right official, and his entire reputation could be dismantled. "I'm prepared," he said with a stoic nod. "I won't run away from this." She studied him a moment longer, as if trying to gauge the depth of his sincerity. Then she glanced away, eyes focused on the gentle waves of the fountain. "Maybe you should think it through. This isn't about winning some moral victory for me. It's about preventing more families from suffering what my mother endured. If that means risking your career, so be it." He took a breath. "Ava, I know I can't fix the past, but maybe together we can shape a better outcome for the future. If you allow me, I'll do everything I can to expose the wrongdoing. I just need time to figure out the right strategy. And I'd like to be a part of the baby's life. Please, let me try." She blinked back tears, her emotions torn. The idea of letting him back in terrified her. Too many broken promises, too many nights crying alone after he left. Yet something in his eyes looked genuine, changed. "I can't promise everything will be all right. I'm still angry and hurt and so unsure. But the baby is yours. I won't deny you that, if you're serious about stepping up." Relief, warm and unexpected, surged through him at her words. "Thank you." He wanted to say more, to promise unwavering support, but the words caught in his throat. He understood it would take more than talk to mend what was broken. They fell into a silence punctuated by the murmuring water. Soft footsteps approached from behind, the faint shuffle of a reporter or curious passerby, perhaps. Ava tensed, and Gabriel instinctively stepped closer, blocking whoever might intrude. The moment was too fragile to be turned into a spectacle. "Gabriel," Ava whispered, "I need to get home and rest. The trial resumes tomorrow and this is all overwhelming." He nodded, letting her slip past him. Before she could walk away, he gently caught her forearm, a gesture that felt both intimate and hesitant. "Let me at least walk you to your car." Ava hesitated, then gave a small nod, her eyes flicking to the modest swell of her belly. "All right," she said softly. They moved through the courtyard side by side, not quite touching, but closer than they'd been in years. Passing the statue in the center of the fountain, the watery reflection cast their figures against a darkening sky. The hush around them felt charged, a fragile peace overshadowed by the knowledge that soon they'd be back in the adversarial spotlight of the courtroom. When they reached her car, she paused. "Gabriel, I hope you're ready for the backlash if you turn on Spencer. They don't tolerate betrayal lightly." He managed a faint, grim smile. "Betrayal or redemption? Maybe it's just a matter of perspective. Either way, I'm ready." She nodded, then got in. He stepped back, hands in his pockets. As she started the engine, he stood there, watching until the taillights vanished down the street. Only then did he allow himself a shuddering breath. Everything in his life was about to change. Again. And for once, he wasn't terrified of that fact. Instead, he felt the flicker of purpose, a chance to make right what had gone so terribly wrong. A cool breeze rustled the trees, scattering a few dried leaves across the courtyard. Gabriel lingered by the fountain, mind swarming with plans and doubts. Tomorrow, he would face the judge and the jury, his own conscience at stake. He was done denying the part he played. The question now was whether he could set aside years of habit and ambition to truly fight for justice, and for the woman and child that might just be his last chance at redemption. The following morning dawned gray and muted, as if the weather itself sensed the gravity of the trial continuing in courtroom B. Gabriel Owens stood in front of his bathroom mirror, carefully knotting his tie, feeling both the weight of impending confrontation and the curious lightness of having finally shared a fragment of truth with Ava. Sleep had eluded him, haunted by flashes of her mother's final days and the child he now knew he'd fathered. But beneath his fatigue lay a glimmer of resolve he'd never felt before. He double-checked his phone for messages from the Spencer board, half expecting a barrage of demands to keep the defense tight, or even threats if he deviated. The screen showed nothing but a succinct reminder from Marianne about the day's schedule. Still, he sensed tension from his corporate employers. They'd be scrutinizing every word he said in the courtroom. Moments later, he stepped onto the street, the city's early bustle subdued by the overcast sky. Lines of cars crawled toward downtown. He hailed a taxi, slipping inside with an uneasy sigh. Today, he'd begin calling the defense's witnesses, financial officers, corporate safety consultants, perhaps even a public relations expert. The old Gabriel Owens would relish the chance to systematically deconstruct the plaintiff's arguments, but now he wondered if the best path was to let the truth stand, rather than twisting it into corporate spin. At the courthouse entrance, swirling tension greeted him. Reporters snapped pictures, rushing forward with microphones the second they recognized his face. Questions flew in a dissonant chorus. "Mr. Owens, is it true you were once married to the plaintiff? How do you respond to accusations that your legal advice contributed to a death? Is Ms. Green's baby?" Gabriel pushed past them, stoic and silent, ignoring the prying inquiries. Yet inside, each question hammered at his conscience. He almost felt relief when a security guard ushered him through a side corridor, shielding him from the media frenzy. Upstairs, in the hallway outside courtroom B, he found Marianne pacing, her arms wrapped around a file. She looked up, relief flooding her face. "Oh, good, you're here. The board has been calling non-stop. They want an update on your strategy." Gabriel loosened his collar. "I'll call them after we settle in. Did they leave any instructions?" Marianne lifted her eyebrows. "Only to maintain the integrity of the company's position and discredit the plaintiff's claims. They were terse, but I sense they're worried, especially after Dr. Patterson's testimony yesterday." He nodded grimly. "I expected as much. Let's gather our key witnesses. First up is the corporate safety director, then the chief financial officer. We'll do what's necessary." At her uncertain look, he added, "But I'm not going to lie or bury legitimate evidence. Understood?" She paused, reading the determination in his eyes. "Yes, sir." A faint smile tugged at her lips, perhaps respect or a sliver of admiration for what she suspected he was trying to do. They entered the courtroom, which was already half filled with spectators. The air buzzed with hushed conversation. On the plaintiff's side, Ava and Mitchell sat quietly reviewing notes. Ava wore a dark sheath dress under a tailored jacket, her posture upright, though Gabriel noticed she occasionally placed a protective hand over her abdomen, as though shielding the growing life from the weighty atmosphere of conflict around her. They locked eyes for a moment. Hers were calm, resolute, as if bracing for whatever might come. Soon the bailiff announced the judge's entrance and everyone rose. Judge Fairchild took her seat, gavelled the session into order, and nodded curtly at Gabriel. "Mr. Owens, you may proceed with the defense's case." "Thank you, Your Honor." Gabriel stood, smoothing his lapels in a practiced gesture. "The defense calls Mr. Harold Fuchs, Safety Director of Spencer Corporation." From the back of the courtroom, a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous air made his way forward. He wore a neatly pressed suit, but the tension on his face suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. After being sworn in, Fuchs sat down, carefully avoiding eye contact with Ava and Mitchell. Gabriel approached, mentally steeling himself for the script he'd typically follow: highlight the company's compliance efforts, shift blame to unforeseen circumstances, and argue the plaintiff's case lacked direct proof. But the memory of Ava's pleas gnawed at him. He addressed the witness. "Mr. Fuchs, how long have you served as safety director at Spencer Corporation?" Fuchs cleared his throat. "About 6 years, sir." Gabriel nodded. "During those 6 years, what measures has Spencer taken to uphold safety standards?" A flicker of relief darted across Fuchs's face, as if grateful for the expected question. "We updated employee training modules, posted hazard signs, purchased protective gear for frontline workers." Gabriel almost cringed internally. He knew how hollow that might sound against evidence that major facility upgrades had been delayed. He forced himself to continue. "Were you aware of any proposals for more extensive improvements, ventilation systems, chemical containment, that were not implemented?" Fuchs shifted in his seat. Proposals came up. The board weighed cost versus benefit. Some upgrades were postponed due to budget constraints. Marianne subtly tapped her pen on the defense table, a silent cue for Gabriel to guide the narrative back to safer ground. But instead of pivoting away, he pressed deeper, ignoring the tremor in his chest. "Postponed," he repeated, voice measured. In your opinion, Mr. Fuchs, would immediate implementation of those upgrades have potentially prevented toxic exposure for workers in certain areas? A murmur rustled through the spectators. Fuchs looked taken aback. He shot a fleeting glance at the group of corporate suits observing from the gallery. Theoretically, yes, it might have helped reduce risks, but the final decision wasn't mine. The board, along with legal counsel, made the call. The tension peaked. Gabriel felt the eyes of the Spencer board members drilling into him. He swallowed. And you consulted with various professionals, correct? Fuchs nodded. Yes, environmental engineers recommended changes, but they were deemed too expensive. Gabriel paused. This wasn't the usual line of defense. He was effectively letting the witness confirm that cost-cutting overshadowed safety, nudging the truth forward. The seat of his expensive suit felt hotter as he risked professional suicide. Thank you, Mr. Fuchs. No further questions. Shocked whispers rose from onlookers. Typically, a defense counsel would emphasize minimal risk, not draw out admissions of possible negligence. But Gabriel felt a flicker of pride in letting honesty surface, even if it was subtle. Judge Fairchild inclined her head. Mr. Dwyer, any cross-examination? Mitchell stood. Briefly, Your Honor. He approached with calm assurance, glancing first at Gabriel as if noting the unexpected angle. Then he turned to Fuchs. Mr. Fuchs, you mentioned legal counsel was part of the decision to delay. Was that counsel specifically Mr. Owens? A ripple of fresh tension. Fuchs cleared his throat. He provided memos that highlighted potential legal consequences versus financial burdens. It influenced the timeline. Ava's eyes flicked to Gabriel, who forced himself not to flinch. He'd known this was coming the moment he opened the door to the truth. Mitchell pressed on. Do you recall him ever warning about the human cost of delaying safety upgrades? Fuchs shifted uncomfortably. He's a lawyer, so mostly he talked about legal exposure. Physical or human consequences didn't come up much in our conversations. The quiet condemnation rang through the room. No one needed to say how it reflected on Gabriel's morals. Mitchell nodded, concluding, no further questions. As Fuchs stepped down, the judge's gaze lingered on Gabriel, her expression one of professional neutrality tinged with curiosity. Mr. Owens, call your next witness. Gabriel inhaled. This was it, the pivot point. He stood and summoned Spencer's chief financial officer, an older woman named Valerie Hahn, who carried herself with the crisp authority of someone used to winning at bottom-line arguments. She took the stand, swore in, and waited, arms folded. Ms. Hahn, Gabriel began, can you outline for the court the budget deliberations that led to postponing certain upgrades? She answered in polished corporate language, describing cost-benefit analyses, shareholder pressures, and strategic resource allocation. It was the typical justification for deferring large-scale safety projects. Then Gabriel asked, when Dr. Patterson's warnings and environmental studies flagged serious hazards in the facility, how did you respond? A faint line formed between Hahn's brows. We considered them carefully, but our analysts determined the immediate renovations would be overly expensive. Instead, we explored alternative solutions, like increased ventilation cleaning and expansions in insurance coverage to protect us from legal claims. Gabriel let the words sink in. Expansions in insurance coverage instead of addressing the hazard. The old him would pivot to spin it as prudent risk management, but now he wanted the jury to see the calculus, that it was all about sidestepping liability. So, effectively, you accepted the risk of worker harm in favor of protecting the company from lawsuits? Hahn froze, eyeing him with alarm. She shot a glance at the row of corporate suits seated behind. That's not how we framed it. We believed the odds of serious harm were low. But it happened nonetheless, Gabriel pressed. Is that correct? Silence draped the courtroom. Hahn's lips parted slightly, then closed again in a firm line. Yes, she muttered finally. It did. Before he could ask more, One of the Spencer executives in the audience cleared his throat pointedly, drawing the judge's stern glance. Gabriel saw the flicker of anxiety in their eyes. This was drifting far from typical corporate defense. He forced himself to remain composed. "No further questions," he said, voice subdued. Mitchell's cross-examination hammered home the recklessness of ignoring medical experts. The CFO tried to deflect, but each answer reinforced the theme of profits over people. By the time she stepped down, the tension among the Spencer representatives was palpable. Gabriel could practically hear them fuming. As the morning session concluded, Judge Fairchild eyed both parties. "We'll break for lunch. Mr. Owens, do you have additional witnesses for the afternoon?" Gabriel hesitated. He had planned to introduce a hired expert to minimize the link between the toxins and Ava's mother's death, but after hearing Dr. Patterson's unassailable account, that angle felt hollow. Still, the corporate side expected him to present it. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, albeit with a note of reluctance. "We have an expert to speak on alternate causes." The judge nodded, banging the gavel. "Court stands adjourned until 2 o'clock. As soon as the courtroom emptied, a tall man in an expensive suit strode up to Gabriel. Emmett Clark, a senior VP from Spencer, face dark with anger. "Owens, we need to talk. Now." Marianne shot Gabriel a warning look, but he nodded. Together, the three stepped into a quiet hallway corner. Emmett wasted no time. "What the hell was that performance? You're practically handing the plaintiff a victory, bringing out evidence that could bury us." Gabriel met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm conducting the defense responsibly, but the facts are what they are." Emmett's nostrils flared. "We didn't pay you top dollar to show remorse on the stand. You protect us. End of story. If you're having second thoughts, maybe we should find new counsel." Marianne stiffened, but Gabriel raised a hand to keep her calm. "Emmett, if I withhold or distort evidence, it won't stand in court, and if we lose big, you'll face far worse than embarrassment. The best approach might be a settlement or a carefully negotiated agreement that acknowledges liability." Emmett cut him off, fury sparking in his eyes. "No settlement. We bury the plaintiff's claims, or we bury you. Understand?" The threat hung in the stale hallway air, raw and unequivocal. Gabriel sensed Marianne stiffen behind him. He forced himself to stay composed, though adrenaline hammered in his veins. "I understand your position," he said evenly, "but let me warn you, if you cross me, you'll face a bigger scandal than you can handle." Emmett's mouth twitched. "Are you threatening me?" "Stating a fact," Gabriel returned, voice cool. "I know enough about the corporation's skeletons to cause real damage if forced. So if you want me gone, fine. But I suggest we end this quietly, with a resolution that doesn't annihilate your stock prices. Up to you." Emmett's gaze wavered, then he jerked a nod. "You better watch yourself, Owens," he hissed, stepping away. "We're not your only problem." He strode off, leaving Gabriel with a roiling stomach. Marianne placed a tentative hand on his elbow. "Are you sure about this, sir? They aren't bluffing. They'll ruin your reputation if it protects their bottom line." Gabriel closed his eyes for a moment. In that instant, he pictured Ava's face, the unborn child, and the anguished memories of her mother. "Yes, I'm sure. Let them try," he said, opening his eyes with renewed resolve. "I'm done living in shadows." They walked off toward the exit, the corridor's fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished floor. Lunch break wouldn't last long, and soon they'd be back under the trial's glare. But for Gabriel, something had irrevocably shifted. A door had opened, one that might lead either to his destruction or to the first honest victory of his entire career. Court resumed at precisely 2 o'clock. The atmosphere felt denser than before, as though each person in the gallery knew the stakes were rising by the minute. Gabriel Owens sat at the defense table, shuffling through his notes, acutely aware that every corporate higher-up from Spencer watched him like a hawk. And they weren't the only ones. Ava Green, with her gentle poise and unwavering gaze, was waiting too, perhaps wondering if he would really follow through on the strange new resolve he'd shown that morning. Judge Fairchild entered, gavel in hand, and the room fell silent. "Mr. Owens," she began, adjusting her glasses, "is the defense ready to call its next witness?" "Yes, Your Honor," Gabriel replied, rising to his feet. "We call Dr. Roland Kemp, toxicology expert." A side door opened and a tall, thin man in a crisp shirt and tie walked in. He had a distinguished bearing that often reassured juries, precisely why Spencer's legal team had chosen him. Dr. Kemp took his oath and settled into the witness box, placing his briefcase at his feet. "Dr. Kemp," Gabriel said, forcing a steady tone, "can you share your credentials with the court?" The doctor cleared his throat. "I hold a PhD in toxicology from Stanford University, with 2 decades of field research on occupational exposures to chemicals." Gabriel nodded. "And in your expert opinion, are there multiple potential causes for severe respiratory illness in industrial settings, beyond the specific toxins alleged by the plaintiff?" Dr. Kemp clasped his hands. "Yes, certainly. Many workplace environments contain pollutants, dust, mold spores, or even off-gassing from cleaning agents that can exacerbate or mimic the symptoms described. Establishing a direct, singular cause can be challenging." It was exactly the line of reasoning Gabriel's defense plan required, cast doubt on a direct link to Spencer's negligence. Yet as Dr. Kemp spoke, listing how secondhand smoke or unrelated medical conditions might also worsen lung health, Gabriel felt a constriction in his chest. He wasn't oblivious to how neat this argument appeared. The old version of himself would have pressed on, emphasizing every possible alternative cause to dismantle Ava's claim. But now he found himself hesitating. Once Dr. Kemp finished, Gabriel paused, glancing toward the defense table. Marianne gave him a slight nod, expecting him to steer the testimony toward exonerating Spencer. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Kemp, can you confirm whether a prolonged high-level toxic exposure, such as from improperly ventilated industrial chemicals, remains a significant factor in respiratory decline?" A subtle frown crossed Kemp's forehead. "Yes, of course," he answered, slightly thrown off. "If a facility has a known toxin and fails to mitigate it, that can indeed lead to severe health issues." Gabriel caught the flicker of surprise in the corporate suits behind him. He was essentially inviting the expert to confirm the very liability they hoped to deny. But he pressed on, ignoring the tension burning at his back. "Thank you, Doctor. No further questions." Mitchell rose for cross-examination, a curious light in his eyes. "Dr. Kemp, in your professional experience, if the toxins in question are documented at unsafe levels, is there a high likelihood they contributed to a worker's fatal illness?" Dr. Kemp hesitated, but he had to maintain credibility. "If the toxins were present at significantly unsafe levels, yes, it could be a leading contributor, though we usually combine data from air samples, medical records, and personal risk factors to be certain." With a polite nod, Mitchell concluded, "No further questions." Judge Fairchild signaled for the witness to step down. Then she turned to Gabriel, her neutral expression betraying only a hint of curiosity. "Mr. Owens, does the defense have additional testimony to present?" Gabriel glanced at Marianne, who shrugged minutely. They had more witnesses lined up, mostly corporate employees prepared to defend the company's safety track record. But what was the point? Each might simply echo earlier statements or end up confirming that cost-based decisions overshadowed risk concerns. Before Gabriel could respond, a court clerk approached the bench and whispered something to the judge. With a nod, Judge Fairchild gestured toward both counsel tables. "Counsel, approach the bench for a moment." The hush in the room intensified. Gabriel and Mitchell walked up to the judge's bench where she waited with an unreadable expression. "In my chambers," she ordered quietly. "Now." Inside Judge Fairchild's chambers, an oak-paneled office lined with serious legal tomes, the mood was sober. The judge settled behind her desk. Mitchell stood on one side, arms folded. Gabriel took the other, trying to maintain composure under the judge's penetrating gaze. "Gentlemen," she began, her tone firm, "I have concerns about the direction of this trial, particularly regarding the conflicting messages from the defense. This morning, Mr. Owens, you elicited testimony that seems to underscore the plaintiff's position. I need clarity on what's happening." Gabriel felt the question simmer in the air. "Are you still defending your client, or have you switched sides?" Mitchell angled his head, interjecting politely. "Your Honor, I found Mr. Owens's line of questioning unusual, but I won't speculate on his motives." Judge Fairchild nodded. "I appreciate your restraint. Mr. Owens, I realize counsel has latitude in examining witnesses, but it appears you're contradicting your own defense strategy. Has something changed?" Gabriel swallowed. In a quieter corner of his mind, he remembered Ava's tearful expression, her plea for truth, and the looming threat from Spencer Corporation. He chose his words carefully. "Your Honor, my role as an officer of the court obligates me to ensure the truth is presented. While I remain defense counsel, I can't ethically suppress pertinent facts or mislead the court. The evidence we've heard strongly suggests that Spencer's cost-based delays played a major role in the plaintiff's loss." The judge's eyes narrowed, though not with anger, more like scrutiny. "I see. So you're conceding liability?" He hesitated, then spoke with a steadiness he didn't quite feel. "Not conceding exactly, but acknowledging that certain corporate decisions contributed to unsafe conditions. My duty is to provide the best representation possible, but I also can't ignore the factual reality." Mitchell observed quietly, his demeanor respectful. Judge Fairchild exhaled, drumming her fingertips on the desk. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Owens. Typically, a defense lawyer either fully defends or steps aside if there's a conflict of interest. Are you requesting to withdraw?" His heart pounded. Resigning might be the straightforward choice, but it would leave Spencer free to replace him with some unscrupulous attorney willing to bury Ava's case. "No, Your Honor," he said, voice tight. "I intend to finish this trial, but I can't do so by denying the truth. If you believe my conduct is improper, I'll respect the court's decision." She studied him for a long moment, then turned to Mitchell. "Mr. Dwyer, do you object to Mr. Owens continuing under these circumstances?" A pause stretched. Mitchell glanced at Gabriel, then spoke slowly. "I have no objection, Your Honor. From the plaintiff's perspective, the defense's transparency benefits the pursuit of truth. If he's not violating attorney-client privilege or breaching ethical rules, we won't protest." A faint hint of admiration flickered in the judge's eyes as she addressed Gabriel. "Mr. Owens, I'm placing you on notice. If it becomes evident you're violating your client's instructions or revealing privileged information, I'll have to reassess. But for now, you may proceed. Understood?" Gabriel nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." "Then let's return to the courtroom," she concluded, standing. "I'm watching closely, Mr. Owens." 5 minutes later, they reconvened. The judge addressed the jury, explaining that she had met with both sides to clarify procedural matters. Then she turned the floor back over to Gabriel. "Mr. Owens, do you wish to call any further witnesses?" He hesitated. "No, Your Honor. The defense rests." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the spectators. Spencer's suits looked visibly alarmed. They'd expected a parade of testimonies to muddy the waters. Judge Fairchild nodded, indicating she'd heard his statement. "Very well. We'll proceed with closing arguments tomorrow morning." Banging the gavel, she dismissed the day's session. Gabriel released a slow exhale. He could feel the tension emanating from the Spencer representatives as they gathered on the other side of the courtroom, scowling. Meanwhile, Ava rose, her expression uncertain. She and Mitchell exchanged a glance of mutual bafflement at Gabriel's abrupt decision to rest their side of the case. As spectators filed out, Spencer's senior VP, Emmett Clark, approached, brow furrowed. "You're making a grave mistake," he snapped under his breath. "The board won't stand for this. We pay you for a vigorous defense. This is sabotage." Marianne hovered nearby, lips pressed tight in apprehension. Gabriel met Emmett's glare. "It's not sabotage. If you have evidence that disproves negligence, present it. But I won't perjure myself or manipulate the facts." Emmett's face reddened. "You fool! Wait till you see the fallout." With that, he spun on his heel and stormed away, trailed by a small coterie of corporate lawyers. Marianne sighed, stepping closer. "They'll file a grievance, maybe even a malpractice claim. You know that, right?" Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck. "I know. Let them. But we'll see what tomorrow brings." From across the aisle, Ava approached, her steps cautious. Mitchell hung back, letting her speak privately. "Gabriel," she said, voice low, "what just happened?" He tried a weary smile. "I'm not sure. I think I'm just tired of twisting facts. The truth is out there. Let the jury decide." Ava studied him with a guarded softness. "If you lose your job, your reputation." He cut in gently. "I've lived with a price on my conscience long enough. I'd rather do something right for once." He glanced around the nearly empty courtroom. "Besides, the real question is, can we do right by your mother's memory and by our child's future?" She swallowed, her eyes glistening. "I wish it didn't have to be so painful. But thank you." A warm current rippled between them. He dipped his head in acknowledgement. Before the moment could linger, Marianne cleared her throat softly, reminding him they'd drawn attention. Ava offered him a small, tremulous smile and returned to Mitchell. Then, with the day's session officially over, everyone began to drift out. Outside, the sky threatened rain again, dark clouds gathering overhead. Gabriel and Marianne headed down the courthouse steps, ignoring the cluster of reporters seeking statements. As they reached the sidewalk, Marianne paused. "What's next, sir?" she asked, voice laced with concern. He gazed at the horizon, where the first flickers of lightning danced. "We prepare for closing arguments. Let them threaten. I'm not backing down." A single raindrop splattered onto the pavement, quickly followed by a scattered shower. In moments, people around them yelped and dashed for cover. Gabriel stood firm, letting the cool droplets wash across his shoulders. Something about the rain felt like a baptism, cleansing away old regrets, even as new trials loomed. He turned to Marianne, who shielded her briefcase beneath her coat. "Let's head back to the office. We'll polish our closing statement." Her eyes flicked across his, as if reading the mixture of dread and quiet resolve. Then she nodded. They set off together under the rain's patter. Tomorrow they'd stand before the judge and jury, forced to reconcile corporate defense with moral truth. One final crossroads, and Gabriel prayed he had enough courage left to choose the path that could redeem them all. The next morning came cloaked in somber gray, a reflection of the tension weighing on everyone who would soon step into courtroom B. Gabriel Owens had barely slept, torn between drafting his closing argument and grappling with the volatile fallout from Spencer Corporation's top brass. Overnight, he'd received no fewer than 6 emails from the board's internal legal team. Some threatened to replace him, others hinted at quietly arranged settlements, and one simply read, "Fix this." He arrived at the courthouse before dawn, slipping in through a back entrance to avoid reporters. The corridor lights were still dim, and echoing footsteps announced the presence of custodial staff or early bird clerks. In the hushed stillness of an empty hallway, he paused, letting the quiet ground him. He needed a calm mind for what lay ahead, final attempts to shape the jury's perception, and to speak the truth without betraying his client's basic rights. When he emerged into the courtroom, only a handful of people were present. 2 bailiffs sipping coffee, the court clerk setting out forms, and Judge Fairchild's law clerk straightening files by the bench. Gabriel inhaled, stepping to his table, placing his briefcase down. He then pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper and reread the lines he'd prepared. It was a speech meant for a typical defense summation, yet it felt hollow now. He had carefully added a separate page that told a different story. The moral standpoint he was finally prepared to state openly. A few times he found himself rewriting phrases in his head. No more spinning. Let the facts be what they are. Soon the room began to fill with the murmurs of spectators. Journalists trickled in, whispering about the trial's unexpected turn. Spencer Corporation's officials arrived in a tense cluster, the venomous looks they cast at Gabriel leaving no doubt. They still expected him to salvage their public image. On the other side, Ava Green entered with measured steps, accompanied by Mitchell. She wore a charcoal blouse, her posture straight and composed, though he caught the faint tremor of her hand as she clutched a stack of notes. Their eyes met, and a silent current of understanding passed between them. She offered a fleeting nod, as if to say she appreciated what he was about to do, even though the outcome remained uncertain. By the time Judge Fairchild took the bench, the gallery was packed. The bailiff's call for order commanded everyone's attention. Then the judge surveyed the room, lips pressed in a thin line. "Are we ready for closing arguments?" she asked. Mitchell Dwyer stood, adjusting his tie. "Yes, Your Honor." Gabriel rose as well. "We are, Your Honor." With that, Judge Fairchild turned to the jury, her demeanor solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will hear from both sides, summarizing the evidence and viewpoints. You have seen the documents, heard the testimonies. It is your role to weigh these carefully." She gestured to Mitchell. "Plaintiff will go first." Clearing his throat, Mitchell moved toward the jury box. A subdued hush fell over the courtroom. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, "you have listened to heartbreaking testimony about how corners were cut, budgets were trimmed, and lives were ultimately placed at risk, all in service of maximizing corporate profit. Ava Green's mother was not just a name on a paycheck or a statistic in a medical chart. She was a living, breathing person, stolen from her daughter by negligence disguised as financial prudence. He displayed a photo of Ava's mother projected on a small screen. Look at her face. She represents countless others who clocked in day after day, believing they worked under responsible conditions. The corporation had warnings, memos, and expert reports urging them to fix the problem. And while they deflected, real people inhaled toxic air, causing irreparable harm. His voice grew steadier, more impassioned. Members of the jury, this is not just about one tragedy. It's about ensuring that these dangerous choices do not continue, that accountability matters, and that no more families lose someone they love because a profit margin was deemed more important than a person's life. Then Mitchell concluded softly, "On behalf of Ms. Green, and in memory of her mother, I ask you to consider the evidence showing clear negligence. We implore you to return a verdict that sends a message. Lives are priceless. Thank you." He moved back to the plaintiff's table, gently placing a comforting hand on Ava's shoulder. An undercurrent of sympathy spread through the courtroom, reinforced by the emotional clarity of his words. Judge Fairchild shifted her attention to Gabriel. "Mr. Owens, you may proceed with the defense's closing argument." A hush that felt absolute fell on the room. All eyes turned to him. The jury, the spectators, the corporate execs who expected him to do his job and crush the plaintiff's case. Even Ava watched, uncertain. Gabriel stepped forward. In that moment, a peculiar calm spread through him, as though every nerve had steadied for this singular purpose. He began quietly, letting the tension build. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I stand here as counsel for Spencer Corporation. You've heard the evidence, and your role is to determine whether the actions or inactions of my client directly caused the tragic death of Ms. Green's mother." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "Typically, I would stand here and argue vigorously that there were other causes, that the link is unproven. I would highlight corporate compliance efforts and question the extent of the exposure. But after weeks of testimony, after cross-examining each witness, I must acknowledge the inescapable truth. The corporation's decisions prolonged unsafe conditions. Their cost-benefit approach placed finances over precaution, and for that, people suffered. A shocked ripple coursed through the gallery. One of Spencer's executives half rose from his seat only to slump back down as murmurs of surprise spread. Gabriel heard a couple of audible gasps. Even Mitchell looked taken aback, not expecting such a frank admission. Gabriel pressed on, voice low but resolute. I have spent my career navigating the law to shield corporations from liability, but in doing so, I lost sight of the human cost that can accompany those legal strategies. Ms. Green's mother and possibly others have paid that cost. You've seen the memos. You know that warnings were dismissed in favor of saving money and managing regulatory risk. I cannot deny it without lying. A hush deepened, like the calm before a storm. Eyes darted between Gabriel and the row of stunned executives. He could practically feel the threat in their glares, the unspoken promise of retribution for this betrayal. Yet he refused to falter. He gripped the podium, knuckles whitening. I will not pretend the plaintiff's mother's illness was entirely straightforward. Health conditions can be complex. Yet the crucial point is that, had the recommended upgrades been implemented sooner, had Spencer Corporation heeded medical concerns, there's a strong chance Ms. Green's mother could have avoided or at least mitigated her fatal condition. We can't say that with absolute certainty, but we can say that corporate inaction stacked the deck against her. He caught Ava's gaze. Her eyes brimmed with raw emotion. In them he saw gratitude but also sadness, recalling all they'd lost. He swallowed. The law's purpose is to ensure accountability. So, members of the jury, while you must weigh the evidence dispassionately, I ask you to remember there are lives behind these documents. My clients, Spencer Corporation, are not monsters, but they made decisions that contributed to a tragic outcome. Should you find them liable, it will serve as a reminder to every organization that people's health and safety must never be relegated behind profit margins. Behind him, a sharp hiss came from the corporate representatives. He heard Emmett Clark mutter something about career suicide, but he forged on. I leave you with this. Do not let cynicism claim that big companies are untouchable. If you see negligence, name it as such. If you find them at fault, hold them accountable. That's the balance our system seeks. Thank you. He stood back, letting the echo of his words settle. The courtroom seemed to quiver with pent-up tension. The judge cleared her throat, nodding gravely. The jury will now receive instructions, she said, turning from counsel to face the panel. Afterward, you will commence deliberations. Deliberations began almost at once. As the jury filed out, restless energy swirled among the remaining spectators. Journalists scurried for vantage points, desperate for a quote. Spencer executives crowded together near the back, exchanging frantic whispers. Gabriel felt the heat of their collective anger, but he braced himself, uncertain what the next hours or minutes might bring. Ava slowly approached him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Gabriel," she whispered, lost for words. He gave her a wan smile. "I meant what I said. Let the jury decide. I'm sorry for everything." She breathed a shaky laugh. "No matter the verdict, I think you just did something brave. Or crazy. Maybe both." He nodded. "Yes, well, guess that's my specialty these days." Mitchell joined them, his own expression conflicted, relief at the helpful admission, but also wariness, as though he couldn't quite trust Gabriel's motives yet. "We'll see how the jury interprets it," he said. "I just hope truth can finally shine here." Then they parted, each group stepping aside. The judge ordered a short recess while the jury deliberated. Gabriel gathered his papers, feeling numb. That final speech might cost him everything: his client's confidence, his professional standing, his financial security. But for the first time since passing the bar, he felt as though he'd acted with genuine integrity. He retreated to a hallway corner, ignoring the dull roar of press and onlookers. Marianne followed, anxiety etched on her face. "Sir, are you okay?" "More or less," he replied, voice tight. "I meant every word in there, but I won't pretend not to be terrified. The board will likely file claims against me for professional misconduct." She sighed. "Maybe, but they'll have a tough time arguing that telling the truth violates legal ethics." Before Gabriel could reply, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He unlocked the screen to find a single line. "You've sealed your fate. We won't forget." A cold shiver ran down his spine. He showed Marianne, who pressed her lips together in alarm. "They're not bluffing. We should be careful." He pocketed the phone, forcing himself to keep calm. "Let them come. Right now, I only care about the jury's decision." Back inside the courtroom, hushes of speculation rose to fill the vacuum of waiting. The minutes dragged by like hours. Emmett Clark paced near the back row, occasionally shooting Gabriel a baleful look. Ava sat with her hands folded protectively over her abdomen, leaning her head toward Mitchell's whispered reassurances. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone scrambled back into place, tension flaring like an electrical storm. Gabriel braced himself, heartbeat thunderous, as the judge gestured for the foreperson to stand. In the hush, the foreperson, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, read from a slip of paper, voice trembling. "We, the jury, find Spencer Corporation liable for negligence resulting in the wrongful death of Ms. Green's mother." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Ava pressed a hand to her mouth, tears sliding down her cheeks. Mitchell slumped in relief. Across the aisle, outraged mutters escaped the cluster of corporate officials, and Emmett slumped in disgust. Gabriel's shoulders sagged with a swirling mix of guilt and relief. The foreperson continued, "We further award compensatory damages to Ms. Green, and we recommend punitive damages subject to the court's review." Judge Fairchild nodded, her expression grave. "So recorded. Thank you, members of the jury, for your service. Court is adjourned." She banged the gavel. Chaos erupted. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashed, and emotional voices clamored in the cramped space. Spencer's executives shouted heatedly, some storming out. In the melee, Ava caught Gabriel's eye, tears flowing freely. She mouthed a silent, "Thank you." He couldn't speak, only nodded, a knot tightening in his throat. He knew this verdict was no panacea for Ava's grief, nor did it fully absolve him of his past complicity. But perhaps it was the first real step in healing, an acknowledgement that her mother's life mattered. Outside the commotion, Emmett Clark strode up one last time, voice dripping with venom. "You'll never work in this town again, Owens," he sneered. "Mark my words." Gabriel mustered a weary half-smile. "You're probably right," he said softly, "but I'll manage to sleep at night." With that, Clark spun on his heel and disappeared into the throng of scowling corporate lawyers. Gabriel let out a shaky exhale. Marianne placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, but he felt a tangle of pride, regret, and budding hope coiled within. He gathered his papers, ignoring the frenzy of reporters. The fight for personal redemption and the future of the child he and Ava shared was only beginning. Yet, in that moment, a calm certainty replaced the old fear. He had made his choice. For once, he had sided with the truth instead of twisting it. And no matter what the corporate world did to him, he found he could live with that. A tense hush clung to the corridors of the courthouse as the crowd dispersed. Gabriel Owens let out a slow breath, lingering near the double doors that led to courtroom B. Typically, after a major verdict, he would pack his briefcase and stride away, ready to jump into a black car waiting to whisk him to the next corporate engagement. Now, he felt strangely unmoored. He'd just watched his client, Spencer Corporation, get found liable for negligence, resulting in the wrongful death of Ava Green's mother. But it wasn't just a professional loss. It was personal, steeped in years of self-reproach. Gazing down at his worn trial notes, He realized it might be the last time he'd stand as defense counsel for a major corporation, at least in the city's high-stakes circles. Beyond the courthouse entrance, a flurry of reporters and cameras swarmed the front steps, hungry for statements from either side. Gabriel could see them through the glass doors, jockeying for position. He tightened his grip on his leather case, considering the possibility of sneaking out the back exit. But a quiet voice in his head reminded him that running would only prolong the inevitable. At his side, Marianne hovered, her brow pinched in concern. "Sir, there's a chance the media will want your side of the story. How do you want to handle it?" He huffed a bitter laugh. "I suppose I'll have to handle it straight on. I doubt there's any spin left to salvage after what I did in that closing argument. But let's face them. Maybe honesty is all we have left." She nodded, loyal as ever, though he sensed her nerves. "All right, I'm with you. But be prepared. Spencer's people are furious." He offered a weary smile. "They have every right to be. Let's go." They stepped into the main hall, where the clatter of camera shutters and the crescendo of voices greeted them. At once, a wave of journalists surrounded him. Microphones jostled toward his face, and a barrage of questions flew. "Mr. Owens, did you knowingly throw the case against your client? Are you still employed by Spencer Corporation after that verdict? Why did you admit corporate negligence? Is it because Ms. Green is your ex-wife?" Marianne tried to form a protective barrier, but the reporters pressed in eagerly, half shouting for answers. Gabriel, though uneasy, raised a hand to calm them. "Listen, I can't comment on every detail, but I will say this. The evidence was clear that Spencer's cost-cutting created unsafe conditions. The jury recognized that, and I respect their decision. As for my future with Spencer, that remains to be seen." "Can you confirm your personal connection to the plaintiff?" a reporter shouted. "Why did you withhold that detail until now?" A flicker of tension crossed his features. "My ex-wife's personal tragedy made me see the real cost of corporate decisions," he replied, voice tight. "In the end, I couldn't ignore that. That's all I'll say." More shouted questions ensued, but Marianne gently tugged his elbow, guiding him away. The jostling crowd parted, revealing an unexpected sight. Ava Green, standing by the corner of the lobby, cradling a file in her arms. She seemed equally surrounded by cameras, Mitchell Dwyer at her side, struggling to keep the press from overwhelming her. Her eyes found Gabriel's over the throng, and a surge of emotion passed between them. Relief, gratitude, fear. She was wading through the same media storm, but her posture remained poised. Taking advantage of a lull, she gently excused herself from the cluster of reporters and, with Mitchell's help, broke free to approach him. They met near a marble pillar, the echo of the crowd at their backs. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Ava's eyes glimmered with residual tears, and her voice quavered when she finally did speak. "It's over, at least this part. I never thought it would end like that." Gabriel exhaled, nodding. "Me neither, but I'm glad the jury saw the truth. Your mother deserved that recognition." She managed a faint smile, glancing at Mitchell, who hung back to give them space. "There's still so much to unravel with the punitive damages, the appeals, but for now, I'm relieved." Marianne discreetly checked her phone. "Sir, we should probably move. Spencer's team is heading this way, and it looks like they're not done with you." Sure enough, Emmett Clark and a pair of other executives descended from the second floor with purposeful strides. Their expressions were a tight mosaic of anger and shock. Even from a distance, Gabriel could sense the confrontation brewing. He turned to Ava. "We should talk later, somewhere private." She nodded, placing a protective hand on her belly. "Call me. I mean it." Then, with Mitchell by her side, she ducked out a side door, presumably to avoid the corporate storm about to break. Gabriel steeled himself as Emmett arrived, flanked by the company's internal counsel. "How dare you!" Emmett hissed, stepping well into Gabriel's personal space. "That was malpractice. We hired you to defend us, not to hand the case to the plaintiff on a silver platter." One of Spencer's corporate attorneys, a woman with stern gray hair, chimed in, "We will pursue every possible recourse. Complaints to the bar, breach of contract, you name it. You won't practice in this state again." A light twitch pulled at Gabriel's mouth. He'd half expected these threats. "Look, you had your day in court. The evidence was overwhelming, and I refuse to commit perjury or bury the truth. If that's malpractice in your eyes, so be it." Emmett's face reddened, but he kept his voice relatively low to avoid further scandal in the lobby. "This is bigger than you, Owens. You think because you have a conscience now, you're a hero? You put a target on your back. Our shareholders will demand a scapegoat." Marianne stiffened. "You're threatening him because he told the truth?" The female attorney's lips curled in a sneer. "Is that what he calls it? He destroyed attorney-client trust. The bar will see it our way." Gabriel forced himself to remain calm. "If you want to escalate, do it. But remember, I have records of board communications, taped instructions encouraging me to do far worse. If you press me, that evidence becomes very public." Emmett clenched his jaw, forcibly reining in fury. "So you plan to blackmail us in your own defense?" He raised a brow. "I'm simply reminding you that attacks go both ways. Your best move might be to pay the damages, settle quietly, and move forward. You've already tarnished the company's reputation enough." For a moment it seemed a physical fight might erupt, but then Emmett let out a frustrated grunt, looked away, and motioned to his internal counsel. "Fine, let's go," he barked, spinning on his heel. "But this isn't over, Owens." In a flurry of expensive suits, they disappeared down the hall. Marianne released a pent-up breath. "Wow, that was intense." Gabriel nodded, still feeling the adrenaline. "Yes, and it's just the start." He scanned the area. Reporters still milled around, filming the tension. "Let's get out of here before they corner us again." They ducked through a rear corridor into the courthouse parking garage, footsteps echoing on the cement floor. Outside, the mid-morning sun peeked through the dissipating clouds, casting a muted glow. He paused by Marianne's small sedan. "What now?" she asked, unlocking the car. He thought of the message he'd received warning him that he'd sealed his fate. The intensity on Emmett's face only confirmed that they'd try to retaliate. "I'll handle any bar complaints if they come. Meanwhile, I need to speak with Ava about next steps, both legal and personal." Marianne hesitated, sympathy in her eyes. "You risked everything back there. Do you regret it?" Gabriel stared at a distant row of cars, reflecting on the swirl of consequences. "I regret how many years I spent fighting for the wrong side, but stepping forward? No. My only regret is that I didn't do it sooner." She placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "All right, keep me posted. I'll handle incoming calls at the office." They parted ways. Gabriel opted to walk, needing the fresh air and time to gather his thoughts. The city's hum enveloped him, each passing car and bustling pedestrian a reminder that life moved on, even in the wake of legal earthquakes. At a quiet corner cafe, he snagged a small table and a cup of coffee, ignoring the sympathetic or curious looks from patrons who recognized him from the news. He sipped in silence, pulling out his phone. His pulse skipped when he saw a message from Ava. "Meet me at the garden park at 2 p.m. Need to breathe away from cameras. Let's talk." He felt a stir of warmth. After everything, she still wanted to talk. With the verdict out, they no longer needed to maintain an adversarial facade. But the child she carried remained the biggest question. Could they truly find a path to co-parent, or even find a semblance of closeness after so many wrong turns? At 1:55, he stood at the edge of Garden Park, a small oasis of greenery nestled downtown. Tall sycamore trees lined the paths, and a stone fountain tinkled softly in the middle. Unlike the courthouse steps, no swarm of reporters lurked here. The occasional jogger or dog walker passed by with indifferent glances. He spotted Ava on a wooden bench near a willow tree, her posture upright but weighed with fatigue. The gray clouds had scattered, revealing a patch of blue overhead. She wore a simple sweater, her hands folded over her abdomen, as if shielding their unborn child from the lingering tension of the day. He approached quietly, and she glanced up, offering a gentle smile. "You came." "Of course," he replied, easing onto the bench beside her, leaving a bit of space. "I figured we should talk without cameras or lawyers or corporate suits." She let out a soft laugh. "Yes, definitely. How are you holding up?" He raked a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. "Well, the verdict is a moral victory. But the aftermath, I'm basically persona non grata in the corporate legal scene, and the board threatened to bury me in claims." She looked away, troubled. "I never meant for you to lose your career." He gently caught her hand, surprising them both with the gesture's quiet intimacy. "I know, but I did what felt right for once. If I lose everything else, so be it. At least I can face the mirror." A silence settled. The fountain's gentle trickle filled the space, punctuated by distant city noise. Ava studied his face, eyes reflecting a conflicted swirl of relief and guilt. "So, where do we go from here? There's the question of punitive damages, plus what Spencer might do on appeal. And there's us, the baby." He nodded, heart thrumming. "I want to support you in every way, financially, emotionally, whatever you need. We never resolved so many things. But I'm done running." Her lip quivered slightly. "This child deserves a father who is present and honest. I'm scared, Gabriel. Our history is messy, and I'm still hurting over what happened with my mother. But you stood up for the truth. Maybe that's a start." He turned her hand gently, feeling the soft press of her pulse. "It is. I won't pretend it fixes everything, but I promise I'll try to be the father and partner you deserve, whichever form that takes. If it means just co-parenting, or if we ever find a way to rebuild more, I'm open." A tear rolled down her cheek, and she tried to smile. "I appreciate that. Mom always said second chances can heal if people truly change. I guess we'll see." He rubbed his thumb across her knuckles, a tender hush enveloping them. The midday sun sifted through the willow leaves, casting shifting patterns across the grass. For the first time in years, Gabriel felt hope stirring, fragile yet profound, a seed planted in the wreckage of old mistakes. They spent an hour in quiet conversation, weaving through the tapestry of regrets, stepping carefully around old wounds. She told him of her mother's final weeks in detail, a memory she'd once kept from him out of anger. He confessed the sleepless nights he'd spent after their divorce, staring at the ceiling, ashamed of how he'd let ambition eclipse compassion. It was painful, honest, raw. When she eventually rose, the day had grown bright. She looked down at her belly, then back at him. "I have to go meet with Mitchell to clarify next steps, but let's keep talking, and maybe see a doctor together next week?" He felt a surge of gratitude. "Yes, I'd like that." With a faint smile, she moved off along the path, her figure receding amid the sunlit leaves. Gabriel remained on the bench, absorbing the quiet. His phone buzzed in his pocket, no doubt calls from Marianne or ominous messages from Spencer's team. For once, he let it ring unanswered, choosing the moment over the crisis. Eventually, he looked at the fountain, remembering how water in its eternal flow could cleanse and renew. The trials were far from over. Corporate retaliation, bar complaints, and the challenges of rebuilding trust with Ava. Yet today, with the verdict delivered and the path of truth chosen, Gabriel felt he could breathe again. He stood, closed his eyes briefly, and then walked toward the park's exit, mind and heart set on the long road ahead, one he intended to navigate with honesty, guiding every step. A crisp morning breeze swept through the downtown skyline, rustling the leaves that clung to early autumn branches. Nearly a week had passed since the jury delivered its verdict against Spencer Corporation. In that short time, Gabriel Owens found himself thrust into a whirlwind of repercussions he'd both anticipated and dreaded. The board's threats had proven far from hollow. Formal bar complaints were filed. Rumors circulated that powerful partners in other firms were distancing themselves from him. Even some old colleagues refused to return his calls. Despite it all, Gabriel carried a surprising sense of calm. He understood that telling the truth in court came with a cost. And though that price was steep, he felt lighter than he had in years, unburdened from the moral knots of his past. Early this morning he'd woken in his modest apartment, no longer the sleek high-rise penthouse he once flaunted, made himself a basic breakfast, and prepared for the day's agenda. First on that list, a scheduled meeting with his longtime associate, Marianne, in the small rented office they now shared after departing from his former firm under tense circumstances. He stepped onto the sidewalk, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. Dawn cast soft light across tall buildings, and the hum of traffic was punctuated by the beep of crosswalk signals. He walked with purposeful strides, passing the vacant corner lot where a new corporate tower was rumored to rise, another testament to the city's relentless pace. Yet for Gabriel, the city felt different now, as though he stood on the outside looking in. When he arrived at the modest office suite, he found Marianne inside, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs. The space was spare, 2 desks, a couple of bookshelves, a lone potted plant by the window. Still, it was private and functional, a place to regroup and figure out what came next. Marianne greeted him with a solemn nod. "Morning, sir. I've been going through the messages again." Gabriel offered a small grin. "No need for sir, Marianne. We're partners for all intents and purposes." She shrugged, handing him a mug. "Habit, I guess. Anyway, there's a letter from the Bar Association's disciplinary committee. They've scheduled a preliminary hearing about the complaint Spencer filed against you." He took the envelope she held out. The official seal stared back like a caution light. "That was fast," he muttered, heart squeezing. "I expected they'd want to move quickly with all the pressure from corporate interests." "They're claiming you violated the duty of loyalty to your client," Marianne explained softly. "But you have plenty of evidence that you were just following the ethics rules, upholding honesty in the face of wrongdoing. I'm sure we can build a defense." Gabriel set the letter aside, forcing a steady breath. "We will. I'm not going to back down. If the truth was uncomfortable for Spencer, that's on them, not me. I still have every email thread and directive they gave me encouraging half-truths and obfuscation." Marianne glanced at the clock. "We should also keep in mind the meeting with Ms. Green's counsel in an hour. They want to finalize some details about the damages, plus discuss the corporation's possible appeal." A faint spark of warmth flickered at the mention of Ava. "Right. I appreciate that Mitchell is looping me in. Ava, too. She's hoping to avoid a drawn-out fight." Marianne eyed him curiously, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "How are things with Ms. Green?" He sipped his coffee to buy a moment. "We're taking it day by day. She's still cautious, which I understand. But we've talked about the baby, and she let me accompany her to the obstetrician yesterday." Marianne's smile deepened. "That's wonderful. How did it go?" He thought of the small exam room with pastel walls, the rhythmic echo of the fetal heartbeat on the monitor, a sound that had stirred a wave of awe and protectiveness inside him. "Hearing that heartbeat changed everything," he admitted, voice soft. "For years I poured myself into winning cases and impressing clients. Now all I can think about is being present for that child." She reached out, touching his shoulder in support. "You'll be a good father, Gabriel. I can see it." He swallowed hard, nodding. "I hope so. Let's get ready for that call with Mitchell." An hour later, Mitchell's voice crackled through the speakerphone in their sparse office. "Good morning, Gabriel, Marianne. Thanks for taking the time." Marianne glanced at Gabriel, who pressed the speaker button. "Go ahead, Mitchell. What's the latest on the post-verdict situation?" A rustling of papers on Mitchell's end. "So far, Spencer Corporation's external counsel has signaled they plan to appeal the verdict, but it's not official yet. They're also fighting the punitive damages portion, claiming the jury's emotional response overrode reason. But given the public attention, I suspect they might try to settle behind closed doors if the numbers get too high. Gabriel folded his arms, leaning back in his chair. They're probably terrified of more negative press. If they drag this out, it'll be a PR nightmare. That might force them to settle, as you said. Mitchell's tone held cautious optimism. Yes, and from Ava's perspective, a fair settlement ensures resources for any future medical investigations or trust funds. Plus, it helps the families of other affected workers who might come forward. Ava wants to see real change, not just hush money. Gabriel felt a stir of admiration. She'd told him as much. Her priority was accountability, not a simple payoff. Well, I'll do whatever I can to facilitate an agreement that enacts safety reforms. I still have some leverage, ironically, from inside knowledge. Thanks, Gabriel, Mitchell replied. Anyway, I'll keep you updated. We have a follow-up meeting with the judge next week to confirm final damages. Let's stay in touch. The call ended with polite farewells, and Marianne hung up. Gabriel breathed out, the tension around his shoulders easing just a fraction. Looks like the next chapter might be negotiating something halfway decent. She nodded. And for you, it also means dealing with that bar hearing soon. Yes, he said, running a hand through his hair. I'll prepare my response. Could you gather all relevant emails or messages from Spencer that might demonstrate they pushed me to mislead the court? Absolutely, Marianne agreed. We'll compile a solid defense. You're doing the right thing. Gabriel mustered a small smile. I try to remember that when the doubt creeps in. Late afternoon found him driving to a quiet residential neighborhood where Ava now lived. Lined with oaks and maples, the street boasted neat single-family homes and well-tended lawns. Kids played on the sidewalk, chasing a red ball. A sense of normalcy permeated the scene, reminding him there was life beyond corporate politics and lawsuits. He parked outside a modest white house with a trim porch. Ava's car was there, and the door opened before he reached the steps. She appeared in the doorway, wearing a comfortable cardigan, her posture still exuding cautious grace. He glimpsed the soft swell of her abdomen and felt a pang of protective warmth. "Hey," she greeted softly, stepping aside so he could enter. The living room was cozy, decorated with soft-toned furniture and a few photographs on the mantel. One, he noticed, showed Ava's mother beaming beside a younger Ava, an echo of what had been lost. He cleared his throat, trying to quiet the pang of regret. "Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," she reassured him. "I'm just making some tea. Want a cup?" He nodded. "Sure, that would be nice." While she poured hot water over tea bags, they discussed the day's developments. Ava sighed. "I heard from Mitchell about the appeal rumors. It's draining to think about more legal drama, but maybe they'll settle if they realize dragging it out harms them more." Gabriel ran a hand along the countertop. "I'll do what I can. The company's executives are furious, but they know a public prolonged fight only worsens their image." He paused. "It's weird. I used to be the one telling them how to break a plaintiff's resolve. Now I'm actively hoping they cave." She glanced over her shoulder, a thoughtful glint in her eyes. "People can change, given the right reason." His gaze dropped to her belly. "I think I found mine," he murmured. She set 2 steaming mugs on the small kitchen table, then gestured for him to sit. He slid into a chair, exhaling softly. A warm aroma of chamomile filled the room. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. They sipped in quiet companionship for a moment before Ava spoke. "Gabriel, about the baby. I've been thinking about living arrangements. It's too soon to rush anything, but I also don't want you shut out of your child's life." He met her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his own. "I don't want to pressure you or cause stress. but I am looking for a place closer to here so I can be around for appointments or if you need anything. Is that okay? Relief curved her lips into a small smile. Yes, that's good. I want the baby to know its father. We'll figure out the details, step by step. Another moment of calm stretched between them, filled with all the complexities of past and future. Then Ava gently placed her hand on top of his, bridging the space that once felt unbreachable. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with emotion, "for standing by the truth. It might not bring my mother back, but it means her loss matters." His throat constricted, and he gave a tight nod. "She did matter. I wish I'd realized how much sooner." They finished their tea in a hush of acceptance, neither pushing for more than the moment allowed. Outside, the sky faded to a dusty violet, stars gradually appearing. Under that endless canopy, it felt as if they were forging something new, a fragile trust built not on illusions, but on shared vulnerability. Before leaving, Gabriel paused by the door. "I'll call you tomorrow. Check in on how you're feeling?" She nodded. "I'd like that." The next few weeks would be a crucible. Bar hearings, settlement talks, the ongoing journey toward co-parenting. But as he stepped off her porch into the cool twilight, he glanced up at the sky and felt a quiet resonance. They were both under the same expanse of stars, forging paths shaped by lessons of loss and the promise of new life. For the first time in years, Gabriel Owens welcomed the unknown. Under that sky, he believed, no matter how messy, the path ahead could still lead to something good, hand in hand with a woman he once lost and a child who now gave him reason to be the man he wished he'd always been. Rain tapped softly against the window of Gabriel's modest office, a gentle percussion that set a contemplative mood. 2 weeks had slid by since the verdict against Spencer Corporation, and although legal processes churned on, appeals filed, settlements negotiated, the atmosphere felt quieter now, like the hush after a thunderstorm. The noise of corporate threats no longer rattled him as deeply. He stood by the narrow window watching droplets collect and slide in meandering paths down the glass. City lights glowed beyond, haloed by the drizzle. It was late. Most of the building had emptied hours ago, yet he remained, partly organizing documents for upcoming negotiations, partly sifting through the remnants of his old life. Stacks of old case files lined one wall, some relating to corporate deals he once championed, others referencing bar complaints he now prepared to face. At his desk, Marianne typed steadily, making last-minute revisions to a statement they planned to present at the disciplinary hearing next week. They hoped to counter Spencer's claim that Gabriel had betrayed his client by reminding the committee of an attorney's higher duty to the court and the truth. She paused, glanced over her shoulder, and spoke quietly. "Want me to recheck the references to their unethical directives, or do you think it's solid?" He turned back from the window, letting the city fade into a backdrop. "Double-check, just in case. The bar panel will want specifics. We can't be vague." Marianne nodded, resuming her work. The rhythmic clack of keys underlined the tension they both felt. This hearing could define whether Gabriel kept his license. Yet despite the looming risk, he felt a steadiness that came from no longer living in half-truths. The unspoken question burned. What would happen if they decided against him? His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He picked it up, heart warming at the name on the screen. Ava. He answered softly, mindful of the quiet office. "Hey." Her tone carried a hopeful note. "Hi. Are you still at the office? It's getting late." He glanced at the clock. Nearly 10. "Yes, but I'm about to wrap up." A pause. "How are you?" There was a slight rustle on her end, a shift of fabric, perhaps her settling on a couch. "Doing okay. Little restless. The baby's kicking. I wanted to hear your voice before bed." He smiled, a sense of gentle wonder lighting his features. Even Marianne, typing away, noticed his expression soften. "I can come by," he offered, "if you need anything." A quiet laugh. No, it's fine. Just wanted to say hi. Maybe tomorrow, if you're free, we can grab an early lunch? Mitchell might finalize that settlement outline with Spencer. After that, I'm free. He agreed, voice hushed. That sounds perfect. I'll text you a time and place. Another rustle, then a smile he could practically hear. Good night, Gabriel. Good night, Ava. He ended the call, setting the phone aside, and noticed Marianne watching with a knowing little smile. You two sound happy, she said gently. He shrugged, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. We're figuring it out. Slowly. She deserves every bit of respect and patience I can offer. Marianne nodded approvingly. Well, I think it's wonderful. They finished their tasks in companionable silence for another half hour. Finally, files were saved, binders stacked. With the office locked up, Gabriel escorted Marianne to her car, ensuring she was safely on her way before returning to his own vehicle. Rain continued its soft patter, but he didn't mind. The gentle drizzle felt cleansing, the city's gleaming streets reminding him of how life could reflect and transform under a new perspective. Early the next morning, he met Ava for breakfast at a small cafe near her neighborhood, a cozy spot with green walls and warm lighting. He arrived first, picking a table by a window, ordering fresh tea and a croissant. When she walked in, he stood, greeting her with a careful, friendly hug. Though they weren't formally back together, that simple closeness felt natural, a bond repairing itself day by day. Over pastries and warm tea, they shared bits of news, her planning updates for the baby's room, his preparations for the bar hearing, the slow movement of Spencer's settlement talks. The conversation flowed easily, softened by mutual acceptance of what had brought them to this point. At one lull, she glanced at him thoughtfully. You know, every time I think about that courtroom, and the moment you admitted Spencer's negligence, it still surprises me. I never expected you to stand up like that. He reached for her hand across the table, thankful she let him keep it. I'd spent so long living for myself, for big wins and high-paying clients. Maybe I needed a deeper reason to see how hollow that was. Losing you once taught me a bitter lesson. Ava's eyes flickered with emotion. She squeezed his hand gently. We can't change the past, but we can choose a better present, especially with a child on the way. I want them to know their father not as a ruthless lawyer, but as someone who fights for what's right. He nodded, throat tight. I'm all in, he whispered. They lingered over breakfast until her phone buzzed with a message from Mitchell confirming an afternoon conference call regarding settlement details. With a regretful smile, she bade him goodbye, promising they'd talk later. Gabriel left the cafe, heart lifted yet aware the day held important challenges. By midday, he found himself in a stately conference room inside the Bar Association's downtown building. Rich mahogany paneling, solemn portraits of past legal luminaries, and the hush of formality announced the seriousness of the place. He wore his best suit, less flashy than before, but pressed with care. Beside him, Marianne clutched a leather folder containing their documentation. A clerk led them to a smaller hearing room, where 3 panel members sat behind a raised table. Each wore a neutral expression that gave no hint of sympathy or hostility. Gabriel inhaled slowly, reminding himself to remain calm and forthright. The panel's chair, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, addressed him. Mr. Owens, we are here to evaluate allegations that you violated your client's interests by admitting negligence in court. Please present your defense. Marianne handed him a neatly collated packet, and he stepped forward to a podium. His voice was steady as he recounted the Spencer case, explaining how evidence indisputably showed hazardous conditions. He referenced emails and directives from Spencer executives, each urging him to downplay risks despite known dangers. I reached a point, he said quietly, where continuing to deny the truth in court would be a willful deception and a violation of ethical standards. My obligation as an officer of the court, and my moral duty, overrode any corporate directive to mislead. This was not a betrayal of my client, but a refusal to perpetuate wrongdoing." He paused, letting the statement resonate. "If this results in censure or punishment, I accept it. But I would not choose differently. My duty was to seek justice, not shield harmful practices." The panel conferred among themselves, flipping through the documents Marianne provided. Gabriel stood motionless, heart pounding beneath his tailored suit. For a tense half-hour, they asked pointed questions about communication with his client, what disclaimers he gave, whether he tried to withdraw from representation. He answered each carefully, emphasizing that resigning would have allowed Spencer's next lawyer to bury the truth, undermining the court's process. In the end, the panel chair leaned forward. "We will issue a formal decision in writing within a week. You are excused." Outside, Marianne exhaled in relief. "That was intense, but I think you did well. You explained your position honestly." Gabriel gave a weary nod. "Let's hope they see it that way." They left the Bar Association building under a bright sun that seemed at odds with the uncertainty in his mind. Yet he felt a quiet pride in himself for standing firm. Whatever the outcome, he hadn't lied to save face. Days later, the verdict arrived in a sealed envelope at his rented office. Marianne hovered anxiously as he slipped a letter opener through the seal. With trembling fingers, he pulled out the printed statement. "We find that Mr. Owen's admissions in court, while unusual, did not violate ethical duties. The evidence strongly supports his claim that corporate instructions conflicted with the law and moral standards. We therefore dismiss Spencer Corporation's complaint, though we caution Mr. Owens that unorthodox methods may invite scrutiny. No further action is recommended." A wave of relief cracked through him. "They dismissed it," he murmured, handing the letter to Marianne. She read it, smiling with tears in her eyes. "You're free of their charges. Congratulations." He exhaled shakily, collapsing into a chair with an unsteady laugh. "I can keep my license." Marianne patted his shoulder. "And your integrity, too." That evening in celebration, he visited Ava carrying a small bouquet of daisies. She opened the door, greeted by his grin. "I come bearing flowers and good news," he said, stepping inside. She took the daisies, eyes brightening. "You won the bar hearing?" He nodded. "They dismissed the complaint, which means I'm not disbarred." An emotional thrill lit her face. She set the flowers in a vase, then turned and, before either could rethink it, wrapped her arms around him. He inhaled the light scent of her hair, arms folding gently around her. The embrace lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement of how far they'd come and what might still lie ahead. They settled in her living room, sipping tea while he filled her in. She listened, a hand occasionally resting on her growing belly, the reminder of their mutual future. "So," she ventured softly, "does this mean you'll still practice law?" He shrugged. "In some capacity, yes, but not like before. No big corporate defense. I've had enough of that world." A small, hopeful smile touched his lips. "Maybe I'll work on the plaintiff's side, helping people who are up against Goliaths. There's satisfaction in that." Ava returned his smile. "I think you'd be good at it. Helping the vulnerable takes a certain empathy, the same empathy you finally showed when it counted." He leaned forward, gently placing a hand atop hers. "It's strange how life turns around. I only wish I'd realized it sooner for your mother's sake." Her gaze flickered with sorrow, then acceptance. "We can't change the past, but maybe now we can honor her memory by preventing other families from going through what we did." They fell into a warm silence, the sound of a clock ticking in the background. Rain pattered faintly outside once again, an echo of past nights, but this time it felt comforting, like a shared shelter. After a while, Gabriel noticed her eyelids growing heavy, fatigue pulling her. He helped her to her feet, supporting her gently. "You should rest," he murmured. She nodded, a sleepy smile forming. Doctor's orders, lots of rest these days. He walked her to her bedroom door, then paused. They shared a hushed moment, a gentle spark in the air. "Sleep well," he whispered. "I'll see you tomorrow?" Her eyes softened with the promise in his. "Yes, I'd like that." He left, heart full. Outside, the cool rain brushed his face as he made his way to his car. For so long, he'd found purpose in courtroom victories and polished suits. Now, he discovered a deeper sense of calling, to fight for those who needed help, to stand beside the woman he nearly lost, and to be a father who would someday hold his child with pride instead of regret. As he drove through glimmering wet streets, the city lights reflected in silver arcs on the pavement. The storm's gentle lullaby accompanied his thoughts. He smiled to himself, a quiet, determined smile. Life wouldn't be simple. The fights ahead, both legal and personal, would be real, but he welcomed them, because through love and truth, he finally had something worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.